And, we should always strive to be just a little out of our comfort zone. That's where life really is. If we push ourselves just a little bit all the time, it can really grow. It's quite extraordinary.
Off Gassing, a scuba podcast with host Nick Hogel. The water-filled passages of Florida are known for the strength of water flow. To enter many of these areas, one must be determined and climb their way in. Not an easy task. On the other hand, it's amazing how easily and willingly one can be pulled into the world of cave diving. Stretch Altenhein's roots in diving began in the Northeast. Here, he would find a passion for technical diving after being introduced to the GUE community. A passion that started with wrecks and eventually found its way to the caves of the Sunshine State. The joy of teaching, building confident divers, overcoming challenges, growing the community, and much more. Please enjoy. Stretch, welcome to the podcast today. How are you doing? It's this evening for you, correct?
It is, yep. Excellent. Doing very well. Thank you. Thank you for having me on your show. I appreciate it's morning where you are in your part of the world.
Yeah. It's just getting my day started, got my coffee going, and it's Christmas Eve over here. So how are the holidays treating you so far?
I have been very busy. Today was my first day off this month. So today was running around and getting ready for Christmas. It's still the 23rd here. But I have to finish everything up tomorrow for the next day.
Awesome. Are you a holiday guy in general? Are they more of a blessing or a curse? How do you feel about the holidays?
I'm learning to really enjoy them. It didn't kind of come naturally for me. I didn't grow up having my family and such. I didn't have the best holidays all the time, but now I'm married and my wife really enjoys the holidays, so I'm really trying to learn to appreciate it and have lovely holidays with her. And we have a lot of friends around, so very blessed in that way.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. So being based in Malaysia now, I definitely enjoy the weather here during the holidays a little bit more. I'm not a big fan of the cold weather, and so it's kind of random being out here because it's so warm, but like in my mind I've just been so used to very cold weather during the holidays, so it's like nice to be able to just not have to throw on a jacket and some long underwear because it's so cold. And granted, being from Texas, it wasn't that cold compared to other places that I lived, but it still got cold down there.
But you were living in New Hampshire at some point.
Yeah. Well, I grew up in New Hampshire, so kind of all over the place, but my family moved to New Hampshire when I was 12 years old. And so pretty much from 12 to 18 lived out there, which doesn't seem like a long time now, but when you're a kid, that's such a huge chunk, of your life at that point. Yeah, so we dealt with some brutal winters up in the Northeast. And actually, that was a question I was going to ask you. You're from the Northeast as well.
I am, yep. Originally from Massachusetts, so technically I am a masshole. But mostly grew up in Connecticut.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm actually more curious to hear about that, but I'll throw out my I guess not my first question now, but my usual first question is, tell me how and why you became a diver. Tell me about that first breath underwater. What led up to that moment? Was it absolutely wonderful? Was it, I absolutely hate this? Was it, this is okay, I think I could do this a little bit more? Tell me all about it.
Sure. So I did grow up in Connecticut, and where I lived, I didn't feel like we had access to a lot of the things that I was excited by. I wanted to be a mountaineer if I saw a mountaineering documentary, but we had hills. Connecticut has Long Island Sound as our shore. So somewhat the least interesting shore in all of the East Coast. So I didn't see surfing and, just stuff that I think I was excited by, this like action adventure, outdoor lifestyle. I just didn't have access. And then I was probably in my mid 20s and I found myself in St. Kitts in the West Indies. And that was my first opportunity to try diving. So I took, typical PADI open water class. And what I realized about an hour before actually doing my first open water dive, I was doing the swim test for the class. And about halfway through the swim test, I realized that this is my first time ever truly swimming. I've jumped off a boat holding a beer and, swam back to the ladder, but I've never done anything like, real swimming, lap swimming. And so about an hour later, now I'm out in the actual ocean and there's waves and there's current. And I'm, just realizing like, an hour ago, I have zero watermanship skills. And I had this moment of, is this really for me? And my instructor said, just look underneath you. There's fish underneath you right now. And I did. I looked down and they're beautiful fish. And so we descend and my first dive was on a pretty insignificant wreck, but it was still just beautiful. It was covered in coral and lots of life. There was fish everywhere. And instantly in this moment, I knew this will change the trajectory of my life for sure. So I went back home and found myself back in St. Kitts just a few weeks later. Did a kind of an experience, trip. Went back again a few weeks after that and signed up for the advanced class. And then at this point, I had bought and read several of the books about Northeast, like the classic Deep Descent and The Last Dive, Shadow Divers. So I'm reading all of these books about Northeast wrecks that I had no idea ever existed. I didn't hear about them, and I was just fascinated. So I'm going back and forth to the Caribbean as often as I can just to dive, and finding out that I have this really interesting diving in my backyard that I just didn't know was there. And on top of this, all the wrecks up north for the really exciting ones that are in the books they're all deep. So I'm looking at the diving that I'm doing in 40 feet of water and 82 degrees, and reading these stories of these guys right on these wrecks and Northeast 40-degree water and big waves and tech diving, and I knew this is for me. So just like I said, it just changed the trajectory of my life quite a bit. So from there, I started looking for instructors that taught technical diving. And I checked out every shop in the area, and there was 6 shops in Connecticut, I believe. And the very last one, and I only picked this one as the last one because they were always closed on my day off. And so I find myself in the area where they are on the day that they're supposed to be closed, but I'm close, so I stop in, and the owner and his wife were there. And, they let me in. Instantly, I saw doubles. It was just, exactly what I was reading about. It was the first time I've ever seen this equipment for myself. And we talked for a while. I was in the shop probably an hour, and he just gave me all sorts of information. And then he wound up giving me one of the early GUE books, I think, Getting Clear on the Basics. But I went home and I read the entire book that day. And then the morning I got to his shop before he got there, and told him, I'm here to return the book and sign up for private lessons. So from there, I was quite hooked. Wound up traveling to Florida with him. Ed Hayes was his name. He was my first GUE instructor. And almost 20 years ago now, he's actually become one of my closest friends. So it's really cool that, if I hadn't gone there on that day, then I can't imagine where my life might be different now. But Ed and I, have been great friends for all this time. He actually was the one that married my wife and I. And we've been partners in a scuba business for the last 2 years. So,
That's awesome, man. That's amazing.
Yeah, just really, not at all what I would have expected, from that first dive initially and realizing like I have no idea how to swim, to fast forward all these years and, that fateful day walking into his shop just really changed my life.
Yeah, no, I absolutely love that. So I started kind of down the recreational path when I first got into it, and it took me a while before I got into the DIR technical side of things. But that was almost kind of my same thing. I there was a couple shops in the Austin, Texas area, and I walked into one shop, and I thought it was a good shop. It was a cool shop. I didn't really know anything. Chatted with the person behind the counter for a little bit, and I was like, okay, cool. Went to the other shop, kind of same thing. Just struck up a conversation and started chatting. I think it was like an hour later, and I was like, this is the shop for me. I don't know what it was, but just kind of clicked. The vibe was there. No, I think that's so awesome too. It's almost like it's meant to be because of the fact that you just showed up. They were hanging out there. They weren't supposed to be open. A quick question. So you started researching the technical diving in the Northeast, and you wanted to do that sort of diving. Obviously, the conditions are very, very different. Did you know that it was going to be that different, or did you have any experience? I'm sure you had experience swimming in those waters, but did you know that it's the tropical diving scene compared to Northeast wreck diving is vastly two different worlds? Did you have any idea at that point, or was it kind of like, were you in for a rude awakening?
I don't think it was really a rude awakening. The books kind of prepared me, which was one of the things that I had found really interesting. It's somewhat easy to dive in, warm, clear water, and a little more challenging with the conditions up north. So, reading about that made me feel like this was a little more adventurous and something that I needed to, work my way up to. So I really anticipated that the challenge was something that I wanted to grow into. And again, having not had good watermanship skills, really took the time to learn along the way. So I wound up signing up for triathlons eventually, which is just a way that forced me to learn how to swim. I knew I couldn't fake it out on the course, so you know, really just had to kind of step up for the level of diving that I was so sort of enticed by.
So you found the GUE path pretty early on. I mean, 20 years ago. Yeah, that's definitely. I mean, I know it's. I don't want to say evolved, but as far as it's become. I don't want to say more public. That's the wrong way to put it, but it's become more known with it. So when you first gravitated towards it, it was still kind of a small niche. I guess it might even still be kind of the niche avenue, but I almost disagree. But I've actually had conversations about this. Like, is it, since I am so far into the industry now, is that why I know about it more compared to someone that just took their open water course? Are they hearing about it as much these days because there's more information out there? Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. I don't know that I have the exact answer, but I believe that Ed was like the 11th instructor or something at the time. Like he was one of the early guys. And so, it really was just serendipitous that I was able to meet him. And I think there's about 200 instructors worldwide now. So it's still niche. It's still a much smaller organization than, Patty or a lot of the others out there. But I definitely think it's more widespread. People know about it. The word is really getting out, and probably a combination of a lot of things and the internet and, divers that kind of buy into what GUE is doing tend to want to share that information with, other people that they're diving with. I think the reputation is out there.
So when you found GUE at that point, you were already an advanced open water diver.
Yeah, for whatever that certification is worth, I didn't have that many dives, right? Maybe 50 total dives or something. And when I found GUE, so I was really new. I was lucky to have found it so early. And definitely one of the things that I recognized, and from reading those books, was that I didn't feel well prepared. I didn't feel well trained. I didn't feel like a real diver yet. And, I don't know at what point I decided, okay, now I think I'm finally maybe a diver, but it wasn't as an advanced diver.
So did you come in, or did you go in taking a fundamentals course?
Yep, that's how we started. Did a couple of days just private training with Ed leading up to the fundamentals class, and then we actually drove down to North Florida where GUE was started. And at the time, I had thought, well, I'll come down, I'll train here, but I'll probably never come back to this part of Florida ever again. So I did my fundamentals at Blue Grotto, and now I live here. I live in High Springs, and I'm in Blue Grotto now. Every week. So over the course of that time, obviously a lot had changed, and I continued to come to High Springs. I took a cave diving class here after passing fundamentals. Absolutely fell in love with the cave diving. At some point, I did wind up doing a lot of diving up north, but the caves called, and it was driving down more and more and more. And then about 4 years ago, I moved to Florida when my daughter became an adult. So she moved away to go to college, and so my wife and I moved originally to South Florida, and then about 2 years ago, we moved up here to the Cape Country.
Oh, awesome, awesome. Yeah, it's a hard call not to pick up. I've said this on the podcast a few times, but the first time, so being from Texas, you hear about the cenotes. Obviously, even Florida too. A lot of people will make the drive out there to Florida from Texas. But I remember we went to we went to Mexico to just do some fun diving, Cozumel, and obviously you hear about the cenotes. So I'm like, yeah, I'll try this out. I'll check it out, see what's going on. And I literally on the way down there was telling my girlfriend, like, yeah, I would never become a cave diver. It's not something that I'm interested in, but I'll go do a cavern dive. At the time, I thought it was a cave until, you educate yourself or you're down there. Yeah, as soon as I got in there, hooked, just immediately hooked. I don't know what it is about it. I was like, I need to do more of this. Just real quick question, though. So when you took the fundamentals, obviously it was very early on in your diving career. So hopefully, I don't know if the habits had been built yet. Was it a very difficult transition going into a fundamentals course? Because I know for some people, it's, they have so many years of diving one way, they go take a fundamentals course and it kind of changes everything that they do, or not changes, but now they have to, essentially do things differently. Was it a hard transition? Do you remember? Or was it kind of, you were still such a newer diver that it was kind of easy to progress into that style of diving?
I think I didn't have a lot of habits. I don't feel like I had that much experience before finding GUE. So very fortunate that way. So I don't think I had to break a lot of habits, but went from 3 mil wetsuit and jacket style BC into I went into doubles and backplate, wing, and dry suit all straight away, all in that first fundamentals class. So I did struggle. It wasn't really easy for me. It was a lot of new stuff. Even if I didn't have to get rid of bad habits, it was new equipment, and I don't think learning to dive doubles is particularly difficult, but dry suit can be.
Yeah,
It's another
yeah, yeah.
volume of gas, and it can take a little while, and it did. It took me some time. I was certainly not a gifted diver. You know, I really, I had to work for it. I had no underwater talents whatsoever, but I had drive. I was very, very motivated. I just, like you had said about the cenotes, as soon as I got done with the fundamentals class, I had gone into the ballroom at Ginny Springs, which is a cavern that they allow you to go in if you're an advanced diver, and just was hooked. Just fell in love. Just found it so beautiful, and the flow coming out of it. I'm sure you've. I don't think you've been to Florida, right?
I've been to Florida, but never diving. Yeah, never
Yeah.
diving.
But I'm sure you've heard, stories of Ginny Springs. It's probably the most notorious cave for diving in America, in our part of North America anyway. And I loved it. I was hooked. So as soon as I had an opportunity to come back, I don't think it was right away. It was probably a year or so later. But when I had the opportunity to come back and take the cave class, I was just really excited and really motivated for it.
Just another random question. So GUE, I don't. I'm just trying to think of the perception of. I don't want to say outsiders. That sounds so bad, but the perception of people that are outside, I guess, of the GUE style of diving. When you were going through that training, it being kind of a small, especially when you started going through it in the area that you are in, the Northeast, was it hard to connect with other divers, or was there already a pretty good community up in that area? And the reason why I ask this question is I don't want to say that the Northeast wreck divers kind of built a reputation upon themselves, right? They had a style of diving that was a little bit different than other divers, right? Does it kind of make sense the direction I'm going in?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Especially sort of the New York, New Jersey rec crowd.
Yes, yes.
Um,
They're
yeah,
notorious. They're notorious.
they they were exactly what the books said they were. But no, I think when I was showing up on the boats and going out on those charters, I got a lot of questions. But I thought people really were more interested than judgmental. And usually if you can have a kind of a one-on-one conversation with people, people are pretty receptive. I didn't feel disadvantaged by any means. And I'm not one to, allow what other people think of me anyway to sort of sway my opinion. But, I liked GUE right away, right from literally from reading that book in day one. And although some of the community around wasn't GUE, I think one of the things that GUE does the best is how community oriented they are. That they really build a great community of divers that maybe the only thing that you have in common with somebody is your passion for diving, but you wind up becoming really great friends with people all over the world because of that passion. So I never felt like an outsider in either way, right? Within GUE's community or taking, myself into other locations where GUE was, less prominent.
No, I would almost even argue that they probably have some of the strongest community bonds around, just because it's such a, I mean, it's still kind of a small, like you said, 200 instructors around the world compared to, the other agencies out there. And even the being out here, it's kind of crazy the community that I've met out here. There's a budding community. There's definitely a community, obviously in Asia, but where I live in Malaysia, it's a little bit of a smaller community, and it's not as technical driven, but the core fundamental skills are still there of this community that wants to better their diving. And it's kind of nice to see, and I'm actually kind of excited to see that GUE is, I don't want to say they're pushing the recreational side of it, but they're building up that community, which I think is actually pretty amazing to see, considering, we all know the stories of I don't want to say other agencies, but there's a lot of bad training out there. Like, we were just speaking of the advanced open water. What does that really mean? At the same time, it's kind of nice to see that they're building up that side of the community, because before I got into GUE, I didn't even know that there was a recreational side of the whole community. I just thought it was all technical divers, back mount doubles, dry suits. I had this misconception going in, so it's kind of nice to see that they're growing that community.
Well, it did for sure sort of start backwards. So when they first started in 1998, they first launched as a nonprofit organization. They had built their cave and technical program. Fundamentals wasn't in place yet. The recreational program wasn't in place. So they were offering sort of this robust training, and then had slowly worked their way backwards. So fundamentals was a course that was developed to help students that wanted to get into cave and tech program succeed, so that they can spend more time actually going in the caves or doing tech dives instead of working on fundamental skills. And this was, hugely successful for them. So that I think the fundamentals class is really what put, GUE on the map. And then eventually, I think that was about 2004 when fundamentals officially launched, and maybe 2008 or 2009 is when the rec program first started kind of making its way out there. But they are doing more with it now. And I think it's really wonderful, so people can get started even earlier in their dive career, somewhat like I did, so that they're not, they don't have to feel missteps like a lot of divers do.
Getting back to the Northeast, were you able to, after reading the books, can you tell me a little bit about some of the Northeast wreck diving?
Yeah, sure. So, I did dive there, more, especially in the beginning, the first maybe 5 years or so while I was up there, even with cave diving kind of in the background. Living up there, that was the diving I was doing the most. So kind of all around Massachusetts, New York, New Jersey, and a lot up in the St. Lawrence Seaway as well. It was really great. I really did enjoy a lot of the dives up there. That's where I felt like I kind of cut my teeth as a technical diver. Slowly going a little bit deeper and deeper and deeper. And then it really was, I think the deep descent was mostly about the Andrea Doria. And so that became sort of my goal. It was really the ship that I wanted to dive. And so one season, I think it was about 2012, 2013, I finally did get to go on that trip. I got to dive that wreck. But leading up to it that year, we had planned charters for every weekend going out and progressively getting a little bit deeper, a little more challenging until we actually made that trip out there. And only the first trip of the season went. And then we didn't get a single other charter out until July when we actually went out for that trip. So at that time, I was running up to the St. Lawrence Seaway and diving up there. I'd drive to New York and spend the first night on the boat, and then they would say, "Oh, we're not going to go out this weekend. The seas are a little too rough." So I'd shoot up to Canada, and then one weekend we actually even drove down to Florida. Like it was a long weekend. We took the time to drive down here, and I think that was when I really started to slow down the Northeast diving. The cave diving, sometimes conditions aren't wonderful, but for the most part, they're quite predictable, and they're almost always good. So instead of risking, planning a weekend and not diving, I just started coming to Florida more and really focused on the cave diving after that. But got about probably 5 to 7 years of really good diving in the Northeast that I really enjoyed quite a bit before shifting my focus so much to cave diving.
I just have a question about, I believe it's the Andrea Doria. I need to educate myself more on this. The Andrea Doria, you'll see people from time to time, and if I'm wrong, please correct me, but you'll see people from time to time, they'll go and dive it, and they'll actually pull artifacts from the Andrea Doria. Is that correct? Like little plates or trinkets?
Yeah, especially in the kind of mid to late '90s, that was like the thing to do. The prized trinket that you could pull off of the wreck was the china. So that's what the divers were really after. And that was some of the stuff that I read a lot in the book. By the time I dove it in 2012 or so, I didn't find any china. There's lots of artifacts in the wrecks, but I don't like taking anything anyway. If you take everything, there's nothing left to see.
Yeah, yeah.
So I've never taken any artifacts from any of the dives I've ever done. But we didn't see plates. There was lots of stuff. But that is one of the things that when that wreck started to get famous with the Northeast Tech crowd, and interestingly enough, a lot of the Florida cave divers were going up there at that time as well to dive that specific wreck. Not so much some of the others, but they would go up there for that. And the China was really kind of the prized possession.
Yeah, because but people still do that, or they'll go down to try to find some things, right? Even today, they'll go down to try to pull up like a souvenir, essentially. Is that correct? Like, am I wrong in thinking that?
No, I think you're right. I think a lot of wreck divers are pretty interested in, you know, taking artifacts. People have different beliefs surrounding this, and a lot of people, the wreck itself, that particular wreck, the Doria, is not in wonderful condition anymore. It sank in, I think, '54. So it's been underwater for a while, and just, Mother Nature is making it deteriorate. And I think for a lot of wreck divers that collect artifacts, that's their argument. That it's not going to last forever anyway, and so they might as well take some stuff. Again, I don't. I want other generations of divers to be able to go there and enjoy it and see it. If we take it, then what's left to see.
Yeah, no, for sure. And the reason why I bring it up is because I'm curious as far as I don't know the rules and regulations. Because personally, yeah, I would feel the same way. I wouldn't take anything off of it. I would just leave it. But I don't know the rules and regulations. Obviously, I know if it's a war wartime or warship, it's illegal to take stuff off of it. So I didn't know what the Andrea Doria classified it. Can you tell me a little bit more about the wreck as far as like depth, how it sank, why it's there?
Yeah, so like I said, I think it sank in 1954, 1952, or 1954, but it was on its voyage from Italy to America and New York. It collided with another ship, the Stockholm. It was foggy, and the two kind of circled around each other until they ultimately hit. So there was a number of deaths during the initial accident. I think about 50 people were killed, but it took overnight for the Doria to actually sink, and the vast majority of the passengers were able to go onto the other ship, the Stockholm. It's a bit far out, so it's technically in international water. It's about 120 miles off of Long Island, so just outside in U.S. jurisdiction. So, I'm not an expert in maritime law, but there's a number of reasons why wrecks are protected. So, if it's, owned by the government, if it's a war ship, if it's in waters, like I know Florida has a lot of antiquity laws. If you find gold from a ship here, then you have to give 50% of what you find to the state. So, sort of you get to keep half as a finder's fee, but the state lays claim to the wrecks. And, all over the world, there's different laws. And sometimes there's a lot of controversy surrounding, who has the rights to a shipwreck. Whether it's the country that owned the wreck, the country that the wreck sank in their waters. Whether there's insurance payouts. There's lots of different things. My understanding with the Doria, the rightful owner of the ship had only asked if the bell was ever found. That was the only thing that they wanted back. But they never gave divers any issues with collecting artifacts. I think particularly because of the owners of the wreck, but I think also it's technically in international water. So when incidences there happened, the Coast Guard was never under any obligation to come and help. But that particular wreck is in the sand to the wreck is exactly at 250 feet. And that it wound up being my first 250-foot dive. Like I said, that season we weren't able to get some of the experienced dives in that we were kind of hoping for. So I don't know what depths was the last one I dove 230 or something like this, but that was my first 250-foot dive, and the only dive that I had really truly spent a lot of time thinking about, dreaming about, training for. Really, particularly that wreck just kind of captivated my heart because that's how I had found technical diving.
And I absolutely am. I don't want to say embarrassed to say this, or I feel bad saying this, is I have not read. I've been recommended Shadow Divers and some of those other books so many times, and I need to read it. I should literally just pop that on the list, go order it, because it's one of those books that I definitely need to read, and some of the other literature out there pertaining to the Northeast wrecks. And I just got done reading, oddly enough, a cave book. It's funny once you start kind of gravitating towards the caves. It's like all I want to do now. It's all I think about. The diving that I think about is just cave diving. So speaking of caves, tell me a little bit more. So you started going down there a little bit more and more. Was that kind of the big reason that you relocated to Florida, was just to be closer to the caves, or just trying to get away from those Northeast winters, as many of us do when we get older?
Both, for sure, the diving was really captivating, but yeah, I was really growing tired of the cold and gray of the Northeast in the winter. But yeah, this is the diving that I really enjoy most. I truly am a diver. I love diving. Shallow reefs. I love seeing little fish. I love big pelagics. I love shipwrecks. But cave diving is really the thing that interests me the most. And I really enjoy the caves here in Florida. They're not as pretty as like Mexico caves, but I think they're a bit more challenging to dive, and I really enjoy diving them. So when I had the opportunity to come here, then I was grateful that I was able to move here and get to dive here pretty regularly.
Awesome, awesome. And I know that, or I want to say, I don't want to say I know, there's kind of two areas for cave diving, correct? Obviously, there's the well-known, world-famous cave country area, but then just to a little bit more to the west, that's where like Mariana is, and they're a little bit separated, obviously. Can you tell me a little bit about the areas of cave diving in Florida?
Yeah, I think those two are what you hear the most about. Our area, Cave Country, kind of the High Springs area, is probably the more well known. And then second to that is Mariana. But there's others for sure. Tallahassee, about 2 hours north of where we are, is, we're WKPP, the Woodville Karst Plains Project. And so that's where that got started, was in the Woodville Karst Plain, just a tiny bit south of Tallahassee. Lots of big cave up there. And then if you just sort of head directly west towards like Tampa area, there's a lot of cave over there. So there's quite a bit basically north of Orlando, all throughout central North Florida.
When you started getting into the cave diving, kind of what was the biggest draw to pull you in, not to pull you into, well, actually maybe pull you into the caves. I guess that's not a bad way to put it.
Sure. Well, we have flow, so the flow really helps kind of push you out of the cave. You have to sort of fight to get in. But I think probably two things, and one, I just find the environment itself just really beautiful. I appreciate the sport of diving in a way that you can participate in cave diving at levels that you would never want to do in the ocean. So if we bring in equipment and we leave it for a few days, it'll be there in a few days when we go back for it. So, most of the caves that we have, you go in and come back out the same entrance and exit. So, the equipment that you leave in, you have at your disposal. And so that type of, leaving decompression bottles, stage bottles, scooters, being able to sort of play in that environment, I feel is a bit more of a sport than, ocean diving. And I really like the sport of diving. I like to plan the dives, to think about what we think the best way of doing them is. What equipment should we bring? What should we just leave at home? And, I just find that really, really enjoyable. It's probably some of what I find the most enjoyable about diving.
At what point did you gravitate and transition into, okay, I'd like to be an instructor, I'd like to teach and mentor people?
So that's a really good question. When I had found GUE, I continued taking a couple of the PADI classes. So as I was working towards fundamentals tech pass, I had taken the rescue class, and then from there it's dive master. And so now they tell you, okay, you're a professional diver. You work in the industry now. Very quickly I was sort of encouraged to become a PADI instructor. Right around that time that I passed as a PADI instructor, I took my Tech 1 class. And Gideon Liu, my tech instructor, had told me his story about becoming a GUE diver, basically, and realizing that he could never teach for PADI again. And hearing his story and how committed and how passionate he was towards GUE, it really made me sort of feel the same way. I really bought into their philosophy, the team diving, the standardized equipment, all of the things that I really appreciated about GUE. So I had taught for a very, very short period of time under PADI, and then just thought, I can't do this. So I put it aside really until about 2 years ago. I guess maybe a little bit longer, but 3 years ago or so, I found myself mentoring a lot of divers and taking a lot of divers a little bit beyond their comfort zone a little, and found how much I enjoyed doing that. And at the same time realizing that like now I've been around a little while and I've got some dive experience and I actually have some things to share. So when we moved to this part of Florida, that was when I really knew like, okay, now I'm going to make a big life transition. I'm really going to focus on sharing the experiences that I have, and I'm really glad that I have. It's been a real passion of mine to to work with divers and to share the knowledge that I've collected from other people and from experiences that I've had. And really love seeing when I get to students that I think will sort of be like Guy was. They're they're bitten by the bug and they have goals, and you know that you can really sort of change their life.
So I taught for a couple of years. It's something that I eventually would like to get back into, just PADI, recreational stuff. And oddly enough, one of my favorite classes that I taught was just open water. As I'm growing as a diver, as my skills, or not I don't want to say skills, as basically I grow as a diver, right? So I'm taking more technical classes. I'm learning. I kind of feel that same way where I'm like, oh, I don't know if I could teach just regular. Well, I want to say that I could. I would like to get back to teaching open water, but I would like to do it differently than how I taught in the past, if that makes sense. So I think it's one of the most important, obviously the most important courses. It literally introduces people to diving, right? And to be able to teach that where there's certain skills that are highly focused on going into the open water course, right? Because I mean, there's definitely we all hear about the type of training that's out there depending on where you are, right? Like the just kind of walk through open water courses depending on where you are in the world. And to be able to teach people right off the bat core fundamental skills, I think would be absolutely amazing. That's why I was kind of pumped with the whole, bringing up the GUE recreational side of it, to be able to say, hey, let's teach people and actually have a high focus on these core skills. So it's something that I would like to eventually get back into, and who knows, at some point maybe I will. But back to your instructor side of things, where do you see that going? What courses do you teach now?
Really, I'm just teaching fundamentals and the primers. So I'm not a recreational instructor with GUE. I think I will go down that path, especially now that the rescue primer is going to become a more popular class. It'll become a prerequisite for getting into cave and technical diving classes. It doesn't have to be a GUE rescue class, but rescue classes will become a part of the prerequisites. So I would like to teach that. And I think because so much of my diving has been in caves, and caves is really what I am passionate about, then I would like to become a cave instructor. Living here, this is something that's available to me. But for now, I'm quite happy teaching fundamentals. It's quite enjoyable. And we get students at all levels. So, a lot of people, just like what you said, I'll never cave dive, or I'll never this. And, I don't ever want to be a tech diver. But, you dribble in a little bit during the course. Say, oh, cave divers were the ones that first invented this, or, it's a little local history. And slowly you start really seeing a lot of the students' interest kind of like, well, maybe. I certainly never, I didn't grow up thinking I would be a cave diver. I wanted to be a diver. I wanted to be a mountaineer. I wanted to do lots of things, but I never thought I'd be a cave diver. If I didn't see it firsthand, I don't think it would have, pulled me in, like you said, the way that it did. But as soon as I got in there, I just knew I wanted more, and I still do. That feeling has not stopped.
And as far as your personal goals, do you have anything in sight? Like, oh, I want to go to this rec, or like what's on the plate for 2025, I should say?
So really a good question. I don't have a specific answer for this year. I have a lot of friends in Europe that I keep saying I'll come and visit. So hopefully this year I do. There's a ton of caves there that I've never seen, and I'd really like to see them. My overarching goal, if I could accomplish only one thing with all of my diving, is that I really want to share diving, like I said, as a sport. It's sort of my personal belief that if people are willing to watch golf, weightlifting, or fishing on TV, then why not us? Why what we're doing is at least as interesting as what they're doing. And diving in general, all of diving, there's so little focus on it. If you see things about the underwater world on television documentaries, they don't tend to focus on the diver. They focus on the fish or the environment. And so I would really like to get diving into everyone's living room. I want to make this an action sport like Red Bull. So if you know any producers out there, I'd really like them to contact me. I have some thoughts. But that's my biggest goal. So maybe not specific to 2025, but share my passion with all of the fundamental students that I possibly can, but try to create avenues and pathways towards making diving something that is just more accessible to everybody. I didn't always think it was accessible to me until I had this opportunity. It's changed every aspect of my life since. So, I want to share that with everybody else. And the words of Sylvia Earle, if you get people into these environments and they get, connected, and they feel the passion for these environments, then now they'll want to protect them. And that's really the true heart of why I want to do it. If we get more people paying attention to what we're doing. And, my friend Bori always says, there's a lot of cool people doing cool things. So you just have to get people to see it. You get them to want to do it too. And if we can do that, then, we actually might be able to make a pretty, substantial difference.
Oh, I love that, man. That's amazing. Yeah, just because it is something I feel I want to see more people diving. I want to see in a good way too, not just, out there tearing up the reef or messing things up. But I'd like to bring it back to the roots. Since you left the Northeast, do you find yourself going up there? Any trips to go back up there? Any wreck diving, or is it just all kind of caves from? Well, not caves, but Florida diving from here on out. Not Florida either, but just, I guess, do you find yourself wanting to go back to the Northeast to visit?
I really thought I would. I thought I'd be up there a lot more. I still have friends up there and things that, do draw me to that area. And I thought I would go back quite a bit. And I really haven't since we've moved down here. I would like to. My wife's family lives up there. My daughter lives in New York, so I'd like to go see her. And of course, if I'm there, then it would be foolish to not go diving. So yeah, I'd really hope to get up there this year. I've connected with a lot of divers in the Midwest as well, and I never dove the Great Lakes. And so as I've been talking with them, I keep hearing their stories. And so I think this summer I'm really going to try to get over there. I don't have any specific wrecks in mind, just would like to get up there and connect with those guys and dive those waters with them.
It's kind of weird how that works out, right? The last time I was there was, I think it was like 2008. And yeah, that was, I flew in. So my parents moved to Texas, I think like 2006, 2007, maybe. I can't quite remember. And then my sister and brother-in-law ended up moving there in 2008. And literally the last time I went to New Hampshire, I flew into Manchester, New Hampshire, went to my brother-in-law's house. The next day we got in a car and I drove out, and that was the last time I've been to the Northeast. And I tell myself all the time, like, I got to go back. I got to go visit. But it's, it's almost becoming such a distant memory to the point now it's like the only connection I have there is just through Facebook friends, like which I still am friends with, right? Like, it's the wonderful world of Facebook. Get to see what your old high school buddies up to. But like, yeah, I need to make it up there, and there's some diving too I would like to go and do up there. I don't know about the Northeast wrecks though. They kind of make me nervous. I haven't been really diving in conditions like that, so maybe it's a goal I should try to set for myself, is to make it up there and do some diving. But like you said, the Great Lakes, that's another place that, it's funny. I was chatting with somebody from that area, and I was telling somebody, I'm like, yeah, it's kind of weird unless you talk to a diver, like a wreck diver. I've told people, like, yeah, the Great Lakes is on my bucket list of places that I'd like to go dive, and they're just like, the Great Lakes, like, why would you ever want to go dive there when they're thinking of tropical blue waters and the Maldives or something? I'm like, no, I think the Great Lakes would be an amazing place to go.
I think, if you asked me, just as I was getting into diving, I would have felt the same way. You just don't know. The biggest piece that you hear about in diving is the reef diving. It's the warm water. It's the clear, limitless visibility, the pretty fish. And I think that's so much of what people think diving is. I mean, the planet is covered in water. There's interesting diving everywhere. There's all kinds of stuff to see. So it's really limitless. I think this year not having a specific goal, it's because there's just so many opportunities, and whichever one we happen to take, well, we'll take. One of the things diving really did teach me is the lesson that you can have anything, but you can't have everything. So if you really are a little bit more particular about your choices, and if I go back home to Connecticut, if I go to the Northeast, it just means that I didn't get to take a different opportunity. maybe I won't be able to come out and see you, right? So, you've got some diving and you're part of the world that I haven't done and I like to take part in. I'd like to come and see you. So
Yeah, no, that'd be awesome, man. And there's definitely some caves out here. Well, there's a group going around Malaysia that are doing that is doing some exploration, and I hope to see it become more of a scene. Obviously, there's a lot of exploration going on in Thailand, Indonesia, China. I'm excited to see kind of what is going on there. I know that there's obviously a lot of information coming out of the China area, the southern area where there's a lot of caves over there. But just a random question: have you heard of? Oddly enough, there's a place in Vermont. Have you heard of Lake Champlain? I've heard that there's some decent wreck diving there, or I don't want to say decent wreck diving. That there's some good, pristine wrecks to be found in Lake Champlain in Vermont, which I was like, man, that might be kind of cool because I don't know how deep the lake is. I heard it somewhere along the way, so I'm curious to know if you ever heard about anything up there.
I have, yeah, I've dove in Vermont. I have not dove Lake Champlain, but yes, I know that there's a lot of wrecks up there. I've been there. It's a beautiful lake, and I would have liked to have dove up there when I was there. I even heard a story that I think Benjamin Franklin had. There's a wreck that he was on at one point before it sank.
Oh, really?
He wasn't on the wreck when it sank, but just to be like, hey, this is the wreck that this famous American was on. It's interesting, but I think not so far away from the St. Lawrence Seaway, where I did do a lot of diving, and you did see a lot of the old wooden shipwrecks and stuff from the same era, and fairly similar conditions and stuff, and I really enjoyed the diving up there. So I would go to Vermont and check that out.
I've been to Vermont plenty of times growing. Obviously, just from New Hampshire is been there quite a bit. So it's something that I'll have to make a trip. I feel bad sometimes because the more people I speak to on the podcast, I'm like, oh, I need to go there. And I love when I hear about these new places. I swear, like, the more people I talk to from the Great Lakes area, I'm like, man, I really have to go there. And then, the Pacific Northwest is another destination that I really want to go. There's places all through Canada. So yeah, there's so many different places that I need to go. But yeah, at some point it'll happen. It'll happen. But my last question that I wanted to ask you, usually I like to throw out some sort of advice question. I need to figure out how to phrase this. When you were going through that water or the waterman skills at the beginning, when you were saying like, okay, I've this first time I've actually been swimming, right? When you were taking that first water test and you had that moment where you're like, okay, am I ready for this? And your instructor basically kind of took you out of that mindset and said, look at the fish, right? Said, look at the fish, and kind of changed your mindset. Somebody that is going through that same thought process, like, am I ready for this? What is the best piece of advice that you could give to that person?
Just put yourself out there. Just do it. So much of life we try to prepare for, and oh, when I'm ready, and then years pass by. I can't imagine where my life would be today if I didn't make that descent. If I said, "Oh, I'm uncomfortable. Maybe not today. Maybe I won't do this." Maybe I would have never gone back to the West Indies again. I would have never. Everything would be radically different. So just do it. Just put yourself out there. Sign up for the thing. Take the class. Be a part of the project. Reach out to the person that you're interested in talking to. Whatever the case is. Put yourself out there. You have nothing to lose, but everything to gain.
Love it, man. Absolutely love it. Yeah, because that's kind of the situation I feel that I'll get myself into sometimes is like I'll get in my own head and I just need to get out of that headspace and kind of essentially get out of my comfort zone sometimes. Obviously to, a safe extent. You don't want to just go jump off of a building right off the bat. Sometimes you got to make that leap, right?
I do. I think you got to make the leap, and we should always strive to be just a little out of our comfort zone. That's where life really is. If we push ourselves just a little bit all the time, it can really grow. It's quite extraordinary. So just get yourself out there. Do the thing that is interesting to you. Connect with the people that are doing it. Just put yourself out there. If you want to be a part of a project, projects need people. call the people in charge of the project and say, hey, I'd like to be a part of it. How do I do it? What do you need? If you want to take the class, look around, find an instructor, find the opportunity that works best for you. But just do it. Put yourself out there and do it.
Stretch, I absolutely want to thank you for coming on to the podcast today. This has been absolutely wonderful hearing about, the Northeast wreck diving. Obviously, I always love to hear about Florida cave diving. It's something I need to get myself out to that area at some point in time. And no, I appreciate it, man. Thank you very much for coming on to the podcast today.
No, I really enjoy it. Thank you for having me on the show. Could I ask you one question?
Yeah.
You said you're reading a book about caving now. What book are you reading?
The Darkness Beckons, Martin Farr. It's a good one. It's so basically it just kind of goes into caving in general, the history of caving, and kind of how it became, cave diving became essentially, the early Europeans. Dry caving led into sump diving, led into exploring cave, pushing it further, and then there's sections in there of the different areas. Obviously a huge section on Florida. Well, they'll go through the different regions. So like, the Americas, Florida, Mexico, France, kind of the big areas of cave diving. And what's actually interesting is I think the revision was in 2015. So I think that was the last revision of this book, which is this current one that I'm reading. And depending on who you speak to, some people will be like, exploration is everything's been explored, right? Everything has been explored. There's nothing real. There's going to be no major breakthroughs, which, the part of me is always like, no, there's still stuff out there, right? And there's things that aren't in the book that have been found since the last revision, which was only 2015. Things like there's a lot of exploration in Indonesia. They have a small section on the China caves. I'm trying to think of where else there's been. I mean, wasn't there just a huge thing in Florida recently of... Oh, Texas. There's a Texas one. They obviously there's a few caves in Texas that aren't in the book. Like I don't even think. I mean, there's a lot of dry caving in Texas, but I know that Andy Pitkin, I think John Kieran, they just did a huge. Obviously, we know what happened with Brett in Texas, but that cave seems like it's there's some exploration to be had.
For sure. Yeah, those guys just got back just a few days ago. They were just there, so. I think they had a pretty productive and successful trip. Saw some really cool photos. SJ took some photos, and it really looks like an amazing cave. I have not been there, but absolutely not. Exploration is not over. There's lots to be found everywhere. The easy stuff has been found. So wonderful. Now let's go find the next layer of more difficult things. Even science has said we've figured it all out. There's nothing left. And of course, this is not true. So I don't think exploration is ever going to end. How do you know that you've found everything that? No, I don't believe this. One bit. I think there's a lot more to be found, and as technology changes and equipment gets better, people will just continue to go and push new boundaries.
Offgassing, a scuba podcast.